Carmen Hope Van Huss was born on October 9, 1973, to parents James and Andrea. In 1993, 19-year-old Carmen was a student at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, and worked at Pizza Hut. She was described as a very caring individual who loved animals and often took in stray cats. She was also an art lover, which is what led her to pursue an art degree. The spring semester was going fine until Carmen failed to show up for work a couple of days in a row. At 10 p.m. on March 22, 1993, Carmen left her father's home and returned to her apartment. Neighbors that night said they heard an unidentified man enter her apartment, followed by a loud fight 2 hours later. Another neighbor heard Carmen scream, "Get off me, get off me," followed by the sound of footsteps leaving the apartment and running down the hallway. 2 days later, on March 24th, a coworker of Carmen's called her father and notified him that she had failed to show up for work. Worried, he began trying to call her, but there was no answer. So he drove to her apartment and knocked on the door, but once again, nothing. He then decided to let himself in and shockingly found Carmen's bloodied body and quickly called 911. When officers arrived, they discovered signs of a struggle, with the table being knocked over, clothes thrown on the floor, and a large pool of blood near her head and blood on the walls. Investigators determined the killer had stabbed her over 60 times using a pocket knife and a screwdriver. The neighbors, who heard the fight 2 nights earlier, never called the police, but instead reported Carmen to the apartment's office staff. While she lay dead in her apartment, the staff placed a note on Carmen's door, asking her to keep the noise down and be more considerate of her neighbors. Sadly, after the murder, Carmen's stepmother, Sherry Van Huss, had to clean the blood up in the apartment. Unfortunately, at the time, investigators were unable to track down her killer, and the case would go unsolved for the next 31 years. They had looked at her boyfriend and ex-boyfriend, but both were out of town on the night of the murder and ultimately ruled out. The first time DNA was analyzed in the case was in 2000, when investigators asked for her DNA to be entered into state and national databases. Then, in 2009, they were able to eliminate a witness who was also considered a potential suspect. 4 years later, in 2013, DNA evidence from a bag found in a trash can and a blood stain from the can itself was investigated further, and unknown male DNA was discovered. From there, a profile was generated and uploaded to CODIS, but no matches were found. In 2023, with help from Parabon Nanolabs and genetic genealogy, investigators were able to narrow down the suspect to 52-year-old Dana Jermaine Shepard, who would have been 21 years old at the time of the murder. He also lived in the same building as Carmen. When investigators tracked him down, he was working as a custodian for the University of Missouri and was visibly shaking when investigators approached and asked for a DNA swab. Finally, on August 30th, 2024, he was arrested and charged with Carmen's murder after the test results showed his DNA matched the DNA from the crime scene. He had 3 charges, one for murder, for knowingly killing another person, another for felony murder for committing a felony during the course of the murder, and the last one for the sexual assault of Carmen. Shepard was no stranger to the law, and in 1992, he was arrested for public intoxication. Then, in 1996, he was arrested for battery in Indiana. In 2001, he was charged with stealing in Missouri, and then for peace disturbance in 2009. Then, in 2013, he was charged with driving on a highway without a license. Sadly, her father, James, never got to see the case solved because he died in a car accident in 2002 at the age of 49. As of September 2024, Shepard is still awaiting the outcome of the case. Major Melvin was born on December 31, 1934, and in the 60s, he met and married his girlfriend, Claudette, who was described as an authentic and loving individual. In the 1970s, they moved from Virginia to Fort Lauderdale, where they raised their 11 children, some of who were from previous marriages. Before Major retired, he worked as a backhoe operator, while Claudette worked as a housekeeper at a hospital. By 2024, 89-year-old Major and 87-year-old Claudette had been married for 60 years, had 28 grandchildren, and were well loved by their family and the community. Unfortunately, a horrible tragedy would change the family's lives forever. On the evening of March 22, 2024, at around 8:47 p.m., Claudette's sister came by the couple's home and discovered that both Major and Claudette were dead and quickly called 911. When investigators arrived and entered the home, they found the couple shot to death. It appeared to them that the shooter came through the front door and caught Major off guard. He quickly tried to get up but got tangled in the blanket on the couch. Claudette heard the noise, and as she was rushing out of the bedroom, she was shot as well. Her mentally disabled brother also lived in the home and was unharmed. He said he had spent the last 2 days sleeping in one of the rooms and watching MASH. He was the one who discovered Claudette's body when he went to grab something to eat. He immediately called his sister and told her it was an emergency and she needed to come quickly. When asked why he didn't call 911, he replied, and I quote, "No one taught me how to call 911. Sadly, he was unaware that his sister, Claudette, and Major were dead. When the investigator explained what had happened, he broke down crying and hugged the detective. Unfortunately, he never heard gunshots or loud noises before finding her. Investigators combed the scene and found several shell casings scattered on the floor. They also found paperwork with estimates for pest control and home renovations in their granddaughter, 34-year-old Jalissa Hill's room. They then discovered that the couple's red 2014 Ford Fusion was missing. Almost 2 weeks later, on April 4th, a man flagged down a Fort Lauderdale police officer to inform him that he had seen the Melvins' car at a towing business he worked for. Investigators went to the tow lot and confirmed it was the Melvins' Ford Fusion. They then got a search warrant to question those who worked for the towing company in hopes of finding out how the car got there. The tow truck driver who towed the car in said his boss sent him a text around 6:30 p.m. on the day of the murder and said a Ford Fusion was for sale and needed to be picked up. When he went to get the car, he asked the man why he was selling it, and the man responded that he was tired of putting money into it. He asked if there was anything wrong, and the man said nothing. He then bought the car on his boss's behalf for $200. About a week later, the tow truck driver saw on the news that investigators were looking for a 2014 Ford Fusion and believed it was the same car he bought. He informed his boss and the police were called. Once investigators learned the location of where the driver met the man selling the car, they went to look for surveillance cameras. However, even after that, they were not able to determine the seller's identity, at least not yet. On April 9th, investigators spoke with the couple's granddaughter, Jalissa, who had stayed at the house the night before the murders. They specifically asked her about the pest control and home renovation estimates they found in her room. She responded that she was set to inherit the house if they died and was making plans to fix it up. This was a red flag for investigators who couldn't understand why she was already making these plans when the couple wasn't even dead yet. A week later, on April 16th, investigators had the car's black box removed, and it revealed that it started up around 3:25 a.m. on the day of the double murder. It was then driven to the Tri-Rail station, where it was left until the towing company bought it the following day. While they were suspicious of Jalissa, they still needed to find the man who sold the car. 9 days later, on April 25th, police were able to confirm the identity of the man as Maurice Newson, Jalissa's boyfriend. When investigators asked the family about him, they said after the murders, he was coming around asking questions and acting strange. They also discovered that Newson had worked for Spirit Airlines as a ground crew chief, but was fired in January of 2024 after being arrested on December 30th for battery. On May 16th, Jalissa was given a polygraph exam and failed on the question of whether or not she was involved in the death of her grandparents. She then walked back her statements about being next in line for the home and said she was never next in line. Court documents actually back this up, and it's believed that Major told her he would give her the home, but it was never official. She most likely didn't discover this until after they were dead. She was also asked about the car, but said she couldn't remember the last time she drove it. However, investigators discovered that she had filed an insurance claim after the murders on behalf of her grandparents and never told the insurance company they were dead. She did, however, express concern about the payment being addressed to Claudette, most likely worried that she wouldn't be able to cash it. She was then asked about Newson, but said they were no longer dating and that she hadn't seen him in a while until he walked by her grandparents' home the day after the murders while she was sitting on the front porch. However, investigators didn't buy her story, and on May 23, 2024, they arrested Jalissa and 30-year-old Newson and charged them both with the double murder. Jalissa also received charges for stealing and selling the car. After their arrest, investigators discovered that Jalissa had sent Newson $1,000 via Zelle. They assumed that was the payment for the murders. As of September 2024, both Jalissa and Newson are awaiting the outcome of the case. Khaleesi Hope Guthrie was born on December 5, 2016, to parents Amanda Mullen and Ted Guthrie. She was described as a very sweet child who was also very empathetic. Unfortunately, Amanda had been addicted to meth for the last 15 years, and in October 2020, she was arrested on a probation violation. She then worked with CPS to determine where Khaleesi should go. She was not allowed to stay with her biological father or Amanda's sister, who had her own CPS case at the time, so she reached out to her friend Candy Royer, who agreed to watch over Khaleesi while she served her 2-year sentence. Amanda thought Royer's home would be good for her because there was another 3-year-old there that she could play with. However, Royer and her boyfriend, Travis Brown, were addicted to meth and heroin, and leaving Khaleesi in their hands was the biggest mistake of Amanda's life. Royer lived in Waynesboro, Virginia, and was on house arrest at the time. Since she couldn't leave the house, CPS took Khaleesi and dropped her off at the home, unaware that Brown also lived there. However, it's unclear if that knowledge would have actually made a difference because later on, CPS denied they were ever involved in the placement of Khaleesi. Over the next few months, the sweet and cheerful Khaleesi began to change. She was growing skinnier and paler and had visible signs of bruises and burns on her body. In a video taken in January of 2021, a balding Khaleesi can be seen so frail that she can't even stand. Amanda was unaware of the abuse and was being told by Royer and Brown that Khaleesi was doing fine, but they needed more money to care for her. She was able to speak to her daughter on the phone and through text messages, but then, one day, that communication suddenly stopped. Anytime she asked Brown and Royer to speak to her daughter, they gave her the runaround, saying she was either not there or was sleeping. Amanda became frustrated, and in March of 2021, she asked Khaleesi's father, Ted, and her cousin, Daniel Mullen, to deliver money and a cell phone to the Royers' home so she could speak with her daughter that way. However, nothing changed. Royer and Brown eventually stopped answering her calls altogether, so Amanda filed a request with the CPS to do a welfare check on Khaleesi. The CPS employee who was assigned the case called the home, received no answer, and never tried again. In August, Ted gave the couple more money, even though Amanda hadn't spoken to her daughter since January. The following month, while Amanda was still behind bars, she saw a news report that Royer was missing. In a panic, she went to the jail guards and explained that she had trusted Royer with her daughter but hadn't heard from her since January and was now afraid something was seriously wrong. They let her call the sheriff, who in turn opened an investigation into Khaleesi's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Amanda contacted friends and family to see if they knew anything. Royer had told some of the family that Khaleesi went to stay with a grandmother or aunt in Covington, Virginia, while she told others that CPS had picked her up. In an effort to find the now missing Royer, the sheriff ran her information and discovered that she wasn't actually missing, but instead was with Brown, hiding from police after they had committed a series of crimes, including stealing a car, passing bad checks, and drug-related offenses. It also turns out that Brown was wanted by police in 5 different jurisdictions for a total of 14 different charges, including strangulation, grand larceny, and assault and battery against a family member. A manhunt got underway, and on September 12, 2021, the couple was arrested at a motel in Pennsylvania. Found with them was the stolen car, along with drugs and stolen checks. However, Khaleesi was still nowhere to be found. The sheriff then filed felony child abuse charges against Royer and traveled to Pennsylvania to question both her and Brown about Khaleesi's whereabouts. When Brown was interviewed, he said he may have smacked her because it was something she allegedly enjoyed. However, he wouldn't give a straight answer regarding where she was. First, he said that CPS came and got her. Then he changed his story and said a friend took her. He then tried to tell investigators that she had taken her own life. Brown continued with his claim, saying that Khaleesi had died accidentally after striking her head, so he wrapped her in a blanket and put her in the trash. He also said before her death that she tried to strangle his own daughter. On September 20th, 8 days after their arrest, a search warrant was executed at their home. Inside, they found a bent wire hanger wrapped in electrical tape with Khaleesi's matted hair stuck in it. Also in the home were multiple blood samples on the wall that linked back to Khaleesi. They had the wire hanger tested for DNA, and it linked back to Royer. At this point, they figured Khaleesi was most likely dead and had been strangled to death by Royer. During the trial, they were able to prove that Royer was the main abuser. They even had video proof of her yelling at Khaleesi in the shower, telling her that no one liked her. Brown, on the other hand, had been mean to Khaleesi, but allegedly never part of the physical torture that Royer subjected her to. Interestingly, it was also revealed that Royer had been having an affair with a then-deputy of Augusta County Sheriff's Office, Dylan Johnson, the same office that was investigating Khaleesi's disappearance and presumed murder. In the end, Royer and Brown pleaded guilty in Pennsylvania to the possession of meth and stolen checks and were sentenced to 2 months to 1 year in jail. In 2022, they were indicted for the murder of Khaleesi, unlawfully concealing her body, conspiracy to commit aggravated murder, conspiracy to commit child abuse, and conspiracy to conceal a dead body. Brown also had additional charges for child abuse, resulting in serious injury. They were then extradited back to Virginia to stand trial. In August 2023, Brown was convicted of aggravated murder, felony murder, and child abuse. 2 weeks later, Royer decided not to stand trial and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. The other charges against her were then dropped. It's insane to think that Royer was allowed guardianship of Khaleesi with her long history of convictions that included drug possession and addiction, robbery, and theft. It's also sad that CPS lied and said they were never part of the plan to have Khaleesi stay with Royer. When Brown was sentenced, Amanda made a final plea for the location of Khaleesi's remains, but he stuck to his story that he didn't know. He was then sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years for the child abuse charge. Investigators believe that Khaleesi's remains are in a landfill and will likely never be found. During Brown's statement, he said he took no part in Khaleesi's horrible death and said he was only focused on getting high. In February of 2024, Royer was sentenced to life in prison. Khaleesi stood 3 feet, weighed 40 pounds, and had blonde hair and blue eyes, and as of September 2024, her remains have not been found. In the summer of 1994, 10-year-old Marie Chantal Desjardins had just recently moved to a suburb of Montreal called Sainte-Thérèse when a horrible tragedy occurred. On July 16th, she spent time at a local snack bar that had pool tables before riding her bike to a friend's house. At about 9:30 p.m., she decided to head home, but sadly would never arrive. She was last seen heading east on the same street as the snack bar. A massive search got underway, and 4 days later, on July 20th, 1994, her body was found 20 minutes away in a wooded area behind the Place Rosemai shopping center. She had sadly been strangled to death and possibly sexually assaulted. Found near her remains were her bike and keys. Unfortunately, with no suspects, the case would go unsolved for the next 30 years. In 2023, the case was reinvestigated, and DNA collected from the scene was sent off for advanced testing and forensic genetic genealogy. From there, investigators were able to identify the suspect as 61-year-old career criminal Réal Courtemanche, who was already behind bars at La Macasa Institution Prison, over 2 hours from Montreal, for another crime when he was charged with Marie Chantel's murder. That crime occurred in 2011 when he climbed into the car of a woman and kidnapped her. He then held her against her will, threatened to kill her, and drove her into a wooded area. In total, he had 89 convictions over a 30-year period, including assaults, theft, and drugs. Then, in 2015, he was declared a danger to society and incarcerated indefinitely. After being charged with first-degree murder for the death of Marie Chantel, he pleaded not guilty. I did read that he passed away before being convicted, but I wasn't able to confirm this. Selena Herrnkind was born to Julie Herrnkind and Matthew Poppy on October 19, 1998, and was immediately placed in foster care. Meanwhile, her parents agreed to take a 12-week parenting class, and in addition, Matthew agreed to go to anger management. The two had met when Matthew was a police cadet in the 122nd Precinct on Staten Island, and she worked at the station house. After getting together, they married, and he took her last name. They then had a total of 5 children together, including Selena, and both quit their jobs. The children in their home were constantly being removed and placed in foster care, only to be returned to the nightmare of living with their parents. The first reported abuse and torture of their children started in January of 1997 when someone had called saying they had placed a baby outside in the freezing temperatures with no clothes on. However, Children's Services would later deny the allegations. In July 1998, the children were removed from the home after their daughter Diane was brought to the ER with bruises all over her body. When medical staff questioned Julie about the bruises, she lied and said that Diane had hit herself with toys and was bumping into her crib. They were then arrested and charged with assaulting and endangering the welfare of Diane. The charges were later dropped due to a lack of evidence, even though they had been investigated 6 times before this incident. The abuse continued, and in 2001, the children, including 3-year-old Selena, were still living with their parents in Stapleton, New York. Plus, Julie was 7 months pregnant with her 6th child. One of Selena's visits to the hospital was for a broken femur that her parents said was the result of her falling out of a bunk bed. She then sadly had to be put in a body cast. Unfortunately, the hospital took them at their word, and a terrified Selena was sent back home with them. On November 5, 2001, the abuse would turn deadly after Selena, who only weighed 22 pounds, soiled her pants. To clean her, they used a wire Brillo pad, which caused severe pain. As she begged them to stop, Julie held her head under cold water in the bathtub until she died from asphyxiation. This is a very abbreviated version of what happened because the actual details are too gruesome to include in this video. After she was dead, Julie called 911, saying she knew she had gone too far this time. Selena's ultimate cause of death was asphyxia, and when Julie and Matthew were brought in for questioning, they confessed to the murder. In the end, Matthew was sentenced to 15 years to life, but has since been released on parole. While behind bars, he was allowed to earn a bachelor's degree in psychology. Julie, on the other hand, was acquitted for second-degree murder, but convicted of first-degree manslaughter and given 25 years in prison. From what I can tell, she was released in October of 2022.